Can you imagine Lewis Hamilton, 7 times world champion, admitting that he can't more and suggesting that Ferrari should replace him? What if I told you that the solution you are looking for could be Sebastian Vettel? What promised to be the final consecration of a legend has become a labyrinth without exit. The arrival of Lewis Hamilton to Ferrari was one of the most anticipated and commented events in decades. Not only for the historical value of the movement, but for the symbolic dimension. The pilot with more poles in history, 7 times champion, joined the most laureate team in Formula One. It was the two-game clash, the marriage that everyone dreamed, but that few hoped to see really concrete. However, reality has been brutal. After 14 great awards, Lewis Hamilton has not risen to the podium in long races. On paper, its best result has been a 4th place, and its only partial victory was in the Sprint of China, a format that barely represents 10% of the real value of a race weekend. If we exclude that parenthesis, its year has been a parade of frustrations, disappointments, and increasingly self-critical statements. He has ended at the points in most races, yes, but always in the shadow of his partner, Charles Leclerc, who has almost systematically overcome both in classification and career rhythm. To adjust to this hostile environment, Hamilton has had to reinvent himself. He has migrated to a more fluid style, closer to that of Leclerc, releasing the accelerator before anticipating the turn and looking for a minimum curve speed. But this change of DNA is not natural for him. Each lap becomes a forced act, each stint an internal battle. And although in some sessions he has managed to approach the rhythm of his partner, the consistency remains elusive. Ferrari, aware of the problem, has tried multiple solutions. From a partial redesign of the rear suspension for the Belgium GP to aerodynamic adjustments in Hungary, the team has worked tirelessly to offer a more manageable base. But so far, none of these changes has generated a substantial transformation. Hamilton continues to pilot a car that does not allow him to express himself, a car that does not feel like his. Ferrari is seeing how his greatest signing in decades is diluted in competitive irrelevance. This is the question that begins to take shape, and the answer apparently could be in a name that resonates strongly in Maranello's halls: Sebastian Vettel. At this point in his career, Lewis Hamilton is not looking for any advice. You do not need empty words or generic recommendations on how to improve your traced in Curve 5. What he needs is deep understanding. And to find that, there is only one figure on the grill, or rather, outside of it, that brings together the necessary credentials to understand their situation with surgical precision: Sebastian Vettel. The story that connects Hamilton and Vettel is rich in nuances. They were rivals for years, fighting titles with opposite philosophies and temperaments. But they also developed mutual respect that transcended the victories. Both were symbols of different eras but equally dominant. Both knew what it is to be on top, and also fall from it. And it is precisely in that shared experience where the idea that today circulates strongly in the halls of Maranello and between the specialized press is born. Hamilton would be looking for the Vettel Council. But this is not a symbolic or emotional movement. It is above all a pragmatic play. Because nobody knows Ferrari's invisible walls as Vettel. No one has been so deeply molded, challenged, and finally worn out by the cultural machinery of the Scuderia. Between 2015 and 2020, Sebastian was the face of the Ferrari project, Schumacher's spiritual heir, the pilot who had to return the glory to the Cavallino. But it was also the one who ended up buried by expectations, internal pressure, and a partner who, curiously, is the same that now shades Hamilton, Charles Leclerc. Parallelism is chilling. Vettel, like Hamilton, arrived in Ferrari as world champion with the intention of making history. And like Hamilton, he ran into a system that prioritized other voices, other priorities, and above all, a car that was never designed for his driving style. Both shared the same silent enemy, the impossibility of deeply influencing the development of the car. Both saw how Leclerc became the golden child of the Scuderia, both for his talent and for his harmony with Maranello's technical DNA. Therefore, for Hamilton, resorting to Vettel is not a sign of weakness. It is a precision maneuver. He wants to understand how those murky waters without drowning. He wants to learn from the mistakes that his predecessor failed to avoid, and perhaps find a different path, an exit that does not end in the same outcome. Now, the big question is, can Vettel contribute something tangible? Or is it simply a decorative figure, a kind of nostalgic bomb? The answer depends on the role assigned to you. As a pilot, his return seems discarded. But as a personal consultant of Hamilton, as a cultural translator between the British pilot and the convoluted internal structure of Ferrari, his usefulness could be enormous. Because beyond the car, what is at stake is the mental health of a champion. His ability to resist when everything is adverse. his willingness to continue fighting when he no longer feels control of the process. Vettel already walked through that minefield. And if you manage to guide Hamilton without making the same mistakes as excess emotional rigidity, or where fighting only an entire ecosystem, then this could be one of the most important alliances we have seen in the modern F1. But there is also a risk that this is not a solution but a sign of despair. Because if a 7-times champion needs to ask for external help to survive in a team, isn't that a reflection that the structure has failed completely? That is the dilemma that looms over this new stage. A dilemma that only time and results can solve. In the midst of this hurricane of uncertainty, cross-statements, internal losses and rumors about figures of the past, a question begins to take shape inside the paddock and also among the most attentive fans of Formula One. And now what? What awaits Lewis Hamilton and Ferrari beyond the current disaster? The answer, like everything in this sport, is not simple. But it does begin to be defined with a word that has repeatedly resonated in Maranello in recent months: reconstruction. Ferrari has done something that rarely in its recent history had allowed: to recognize that the current project is not working, at least not in the expected direction. The most interesting thing is that, instead of focusing only on the immediate results of 2025, they have already begun to work with an eye on 2026, when a new technical regulation will be introduced that promises to reconfigure the entire hierarchy of the category. And there, for the first time since his arrival, Hamilton will have a direct voice in the design of the new car. This point marks a radical change in its relationship with the team. Until now, Lewis has been an invited figure to the banquet, a star name that reached a structure already defined by others. But facing 2026, Ferrari undertakes to become the protagonist of engineering. Not as a star pilot only, but as an architect of the car that will potentially accompany him in his last seasons in F1. The objective is clear: to build a car that respects its style, which adapts to its way of braking, to its sensitivity in high-speed curves, to its need for clear feedback from the rear axle. The technical team knows it, and Frédéric Vasseur has been emphatic that this second phase of the Hamilton project in Ferrari will not repeat the errors of the first. Now, the great unknown is whether patience will reach. Because although 2026 may sound like a new beginning, the present is still ruthless. There are many races in 2025, and no future promise will relieve the pressure that comes week by week, nor the humiliation of seeing how his partner fights for podiums while he fights to enter Q3. In addition, there is an emotional and symbolic dimension that Ferrari must manage with tweezers. Hamilton is not any pilot. It is a historical media figure with a legacy that transcends the paddock. If your passage through Maranello ends up being a failure, the damage will not only be sports but also reputational. For Ferrari, it would be another chapter in its long history of wasted opportunities with world champions. For Hamilton, it would be an unnecessary stain in a race that has touched perfection. Therefore, there is an invisible but crucial element in play: time. How long are Hamilton waiting? How long will Ferrari grant before looking for alternatives more compatible with his car and his vision of the future? Because if in 2026 Ferrari gives him a car that feels his, to return confidence, to connect him again with his winning instinct, then yes, we could witness the rebirth of one of the most legendary pilots of all time. But if that promise is diluted, if the transformation does not arrive, if the internal culture of the Scuderia is imposed again on the pilot's criteria, then this story will end like so many others, with a silent exit, an early farewell, and the bitter feeling of what could have been. Ferrari and Hamilton are standing at a crossroads. One leads to oblivion, the other to redemption. What we are witnessing with Lewis Hamilton and Ferrari is not just a bad streak. It is much more than that. It is a story of overflowing expectations, of postponed dreams, of realities that do not fit. It is the story of a champion who has won everything, trying to rebuild within a structure that has devoured many before him. And in this context, Sebastian Vettel appears as a symbol, a figure that already toured that same path, which lived the same type of frustration, and that could now offer something more valuable than a simple opinion: real understanding and practical orientation. That Hamilton looks for it or not, that Ferrari incorporates it or discards it, is irrelevant to the essential. The message behind that possibility is clear. Even the largest may need help not to get lost within your own legend. Is Hamilton really failing? Or the system around it is unable to adapt to its greatness? What does it really mean to fail when you have conquered everything that was to be conquered? And most importantly, what would you do in place? Would you look for advice? Would you cling to a long-term reconstruction? Or would you accept that it is time to rethink everything, even if that means changing the way once again? This is the time when I invite you to join the conversation. Leave me your opinion in the comments. What do you think Hamilton should do from now on? Trust the Ferrari process? Ask for more control in the car design? Or accept that this stage was a mistake and look for an honorable exit before it is too late?